Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War News Update, second part there for the 28th of January 2024. Just before we start with our military aid and equipment section, just to give you a little bit more detail about the hit on Kremenchuk, the Ukrainian oil facility as we now know. That's been burning for some time. Over 150 fighters brought from various regions to control the flames, says Tim White. There were no injuries from Russia's attack with Iskander missiles. Those are ballistic missiles that the Ukrainians will find very hard to take down. This is the sort of attack that Ukraine has been doing on the Russians, although, with Iskander missiles, the Russians are going to have more explosive capacity than the drones that the Ukrainians have been using. So this is going to hurt the Ukrainians for sure. I mean, that's an oil facility that is providing oil for the Ukrainian war effort. Right, moving on to equipment and military aid. Just going to give a bit of a summary as to what happened in Ramstein, the latest Ramstein meeting. It was a virtual one where they met last week online. Some things that came out from that, some of which I just want to give a little bit of a clarification perhaps. So, quote, a productive meeting, the support continues, there were important statements and commitments, it will continue. This year we will receive weapons that are not yet available for us. Now, I reported this, everywhere reported this as we will receive weapons that do not yet exist. And I don't know if that's a translation issue, because we were all talking about, what weapon doesn't exist yet that is going to be produced? Is this some kind of new weapon that they're working together with allies to produce? Or is it perhaps just a mistranslation and it's a weapon that we don't have at the moment? So, for example, Taurus. I mean, I don't think that's going to be the case, but Taurus is a weapon they don't have that could become later available for them. And that's two different things. Anyway, will help us to hit the enemy and its logistics hubs, says Ukrainian Defense Ministry spokesman Pavlyuk following the Ramstein format meeting. Now, in the wake of the meeting that took place, says Euromaidan Press, on 23rd of January, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reported on a number of agreements reached with partners. The ministry's key message was stop panicking, because there are no hints that Ukraine was losing support. On the contrary, they are talking about increasing aid, Defense Express says. Now, we must take into consideration that there is an impasse in Congress in the US, and there's a huge amount of aid that the US aren't able to give at the moment. So the question is, will that come? And then what's going on with the rest of the world? Is the rest of the world stepping up so that it's not a case of panicking? Everyone else is being able to produce more and help more going forward, that it's all looking rather good? Or is that still not going to be enough, given that there is no guarantee that the US can provide the aid that the rest of the world is hoping will be provided, or the rest of the supporters of Ukraine are hoping will be provided? Quote, so in general, in this situation, it was not even appropriate to discuss scenarios where Ukraine is left without assistance. This is out of the question. We are talking about increasing the volume of the aid package to meet Ukraine's needs, the ministry spokesman said, according to Suspilna. It talks about what the outcomes were in bullet points here from Ramstein. There's a lot of a lot of emphasis on capability coalitions, so sort of maritime security, demining, information technology, ground-based air defenses, artillery, air force, these different groups where there are coalition partners working to specialize. Say, right, we're experts on cyber warfare. Maybe some of the Baltic nations are going to say, right, we're smaller nations, but we're pretty tech savvy. We will help by spearheading that capability coalition to help Ukraine. And so there are these things that are coming out of the last Ramstein meeting, as well as other things to do with sort of military aid and F-16 pilot training and so on and so forth. Anyway, a lot of emphasis was put on deep strike weapons. So here's a quote. Special attention was paid to deep strike weapons, i.e. systems that allow striking behind a contact line, and there is a full understanding of our partners that we need these weapons. The commitment to work to provide Ukraine with more weapons for such strikes was clearly assumed by the partners. They talked about it and paid special attention to it, said Ukraine Defense Ministry spokesman Pavlyuk. Currently, the Ukrainian armed forces are actively using such deep strike weapons as Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles provided by Britain and France, which remain the only weapons of this type available for Ukraine, apart from the limited one-time supply of ATACMS missiles by the US. Quote, as for the new weapons already announced, in the short term, Ukraine is expected to receive, and there's been lots of people talking about this on my threads, consistently, like, when are they going to arrive? When are they going to arrive? They're expected to receive high-precision GLSDB missile bomb hybrids for HIMARS multiple rocket launchers, which will allow Ukraine to attack targets at a range of 150 kilometers. So these are ground-launched, small-diameter bombs that have been rather like the aviation FAB 500s that the Russians used, or the JDAMs that the Ukrainians have some access to, which have guided glide kits, and you drop a bomb and it can have some kind of precision with guidance that allows it to have greater range. With the ground launch, but yet they're taking old sort of cruddier rockets and then adapting them so that you can fire them out of HIMARS and give a greater range to them, a greater precision, etc., etc., same kind of thing. Now, if they can have these, then that will allow them to reach targets with HIMARS that outstrip the 84-kilometer range that is presently on the standard kind of HIMARS missiles that you know, okay, ATACMS aside, which is the unitary missile sent out of a single pod, but you have either 6 or, depending on whether it's the American HIMARS or the other versions that are used, maybe the Mars 2 that has, I think, 12. You get the track version or the wheeled version. The HIMARS is a wheeled version, gives you slightly more mobility, but of course not so good in certain terrain. But you can drive it on the road really quickly. It's shoot and scoot, but there's a pod of 6. You fire them, they give 84-kilometer range, whereas these GLSDB that arguably are going to be cheaper and should be fairly numerous, gives you a range of 150 kilometers, and that could be incredibly important. That's it there. To continue, according to Defense Express, speculations abound regarding the potential transfer of advanced weaponry from the US, including the AGM-158 JASSM air-launched cruise missiles, the long-range anti-ship LRASM, or the extended-range ER, the extended-range GIMLRS rockets for HIMARS, among others. The primary focus, however, remains on timelines, as the Ukrainian Defense Ministry spokesperson noted that Ukraine will receive many important types of weaponry capable of targeting, quote, the enemy, both on and beyond the front line next year. Quote, this means that plans to obtain certain types of long-range weapons will be implemented only in 2025. This may be due to the fact that these weapons still need to be produced in sufficient quantities, and for this purpose it also needs to be contracted, which also takes time, Defense Express notes. However, the mention of the next year doesn't exclude any long-range additions to the Ukrainian army's arsenal already this year. So yeah, okay, 2025 is a long way away, and if you're going to put things in place and ramp up production and get contracts signed, then that's going to take time. But there are things that should be in the pipeline at the moment, such as the GLSDB. There have been issues with that because they had to literally create production lines as Boeing and Saab together for those munitions, and then the testing has been quite important, because there was, I think, a very real threat of them blowing up on the planes as they're released. So I believe there were some issues, rather important issues, that might have had to been sorted out. Right. Something that's doing the rounds at the moment. The political and military leadership of Greece has approved the transfer of obsolete weapons systems to Ukraine. Greece is armed with Tor, OSA and S-300 air defense systems, as well as Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft guns and ammunition for the aforementioned. This has been ongoing for a long time. Greece has got a lot of Soviet-era equipment that could go to Ukraine. Greece wanted to keep hold of it due to the issues with Turkey. So Greece and Turkey are not friends with each other, even though, you know, they're both part of the West. You know, NATO, Turkey's part of NATO. Greece and Turkey fight over Cyprus. They kind of own half of it each. And so Greece has quite a lot of military equipment that they want to keep hold of just in case it flares up. Tensions have been fairly testy recently, so they haven't given stuff to Ukraine, but it appears that they might be getting stuff from the US. And this is the way that the US can help in ways that isn't just like signing off a big $60 billion package. So I've been talking about recently how the US will be working really hard behind the scenes to mitigate the inability to get that $60 billion package out of Congress. And this is arguably going to be one of them. So Greece has approved these outdated weapons going to Ukraine, writes RBC Ukraine with reference to Kati Marini. Soon outdated equipment that are no longer used by the Greek army will be transferred. Now, when you go to the original Greek article here, it's a lot talking about F-35. So Turkey are getting these F-16s from the US. Greece are looking at getting the F-35, so fifth generation plane there. But actually, this article goes into a lot of detail to do with what Turkey are getting and what Greece are getting, and that kind of one-upmanship there. But all we're getting at the end here is a very vague paragraph. Kati Marini reports that political and military leadership has already given the necessary directions so that obsolete systems and equipment that are no longer used by Greek army can be transferred to Ukraine in order to secure resources for new armament programs. In other words, part of the deal, it seems, I mean, that's the inference here, part of the deal would be, that's the implication here, it would be that the US will only sign off on the delivery of certain bits of kit to Greece if the Greeks give a bunch of stuff to Ukraine. And again, this is how the US can deliver stuff to Ukraine without delivering it from their own stocks or paying for it themselves, just saying, look, part of the contract is you have to do that. We don't have to sign this off in Congress or whatever. This is all part of the dealing that we're doing with you in selling you armaments, and that's really important. This is how powerful the US is in terms of what they can achieve outside of giving explicit aid packages. There's a lot of arm twisting that they can do. They hold a lot of power for leverage. OSINT Technical here reporting that Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 Fulcrum has been newly restored to fighting condition from deep storage, seen here sporting a new nose art. These are old bits of kit, and there are many nations who, we saw Slovakia and Poland giving a whole bunch of these, I think 29 or 30, around 30 of them between the two countries. There would also be, bits and pieces of MiG-29s in warehouses in a number of countries, including Ukraine, and it appears that they've been able to, piece together enough stuff to create a new one, and that's obviously going to be super useful for the Ukrainians, though it's not the level of airframe that they would really like, such as F-16s, Gripens, and whatnot. Now, this is another example of how the Ukrainians get an awful lot of drones from an awful lot of different places. And I wonder whether, as I have done previously, there is a competitive advantage that the Ukrainians have over the Russians, because they have a lot more nations and friends and donors, including ourselves, like the work that Greg Terry is doing with Prof. Gerdes, myself, and Rick the Ukrainian. And by the way, we have raised, I think, $176,000 now. This is insanely impressive. But part of that are drones that are going to go to the front line, and getting those drones ourselves, or Greg doing it himself, and getting those drones to the front line, a whole bunch of them. Right here we have donors and followers meet Noel's Birds, 115. So this is Noel Reports, has his own fundraising appeal, where they've raised the money for 115 first-person view drones, financed with funds from our December fundraiser. They'll be handed out today. More videos and interviews later this weekend. And then here, look at this. Look at the drones there. And again, we can talk about the production capabilities or capacities of Russia compared to Ukraine. And we believe that Ukraine is, they say they're producing 50,000 a month. Russia say they're producing 300,000 a month. But we discussed this earlier. Until you see that translated to the usage on the front lines, I would take what the Russians claim with a massive pinch of salt. But we are seeing actual verified evidence of Ukraine receiving an awful lot of drones from an awful lot of places, as well as making them themselves, right? So the first batch of 2,020 FPV daytime drones purchased as part of Operation Unity 2 New Year's Salute is being prepared for shipment. One of the largest donors to the purchase of these drones was Favbet.ua. It contributed 20 million Ukrainian hryvnias to both the Operation Unity and Unity 2 New Year's Salute. In total, since the beginning of the Russian invasion, the country's defense forces have received more than 260 vehicles and 130 drones of various types, including attack drones, with assistance of the Favbet Foundation. As of January 2024, the foundation has provided assistance to the defense forces worth 210 million hryvnias. This is, again, just brilliant, exactly what Ukraine need. They need these being provided just on a massive scale and very consistently. And I think they're getting that. And I don't know. My intuitive, and this is pure speculation, my intuitive belief is that the Ukrainians are probably out procuring drones, I think, over the Russians. But the Russians do have some significant technological advancements in their drones, but I don't think they've scaled that up. So I think that some of their drones can do things that the Ukrainian drones can't do, and they're ahead of the game in certain areas of technology. But if that's not taking place right across the front line with their drones, or at least meaningfully, then, well, it's not meaningful, that technological advance. We'll see. Right. Talking about it's not military aid or assistance, but it's recruitment. This is incredibly significant, I think. So the Kremlin, and this is according to the Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, they reported this a couple of days ago. I didn't pick up on this, and now I heard it on Ukraine the latest. The Kremlin is reportedly no longer offering pardons to convict recruits, and is significantly changing the terms of their service, likely in response to the reduction of the pool of convicts suitable for recruitment into Russian force generation efforts. The BBC reported that Russian officials likely ended recruitment into Storm Z units in August 2023 and began recruiting convicts into Storm V units based on new contract terms in September 2023. Russian officials previously recruited convicts through promises of pardons and six-month contracts, and Storm V units reportedly provide no promise of pardon or even parole and extend convicts' contracts indefinitely until the end of the war. So what's going on here is that I think the Russians have realized that giving them 6-month contracts and remaining true to those contracts and allowing these convicts to... I mean, it sounded good for the Russians at the beginning because I don't think that they were thinking the war would go on so long. And now the war is clearly going to go on longer than they were hoping. They have to deal with a whole bunch of convicts then being released into society, and that being deeply unpopular with the local communities in which they are released, and being, a problem for social cohesion, etc., etc. So they're thinking, right, okay, that's an issue. Then also it appears that once you've got most of those convicts, the ones that are left are, you're probably taking the best kind of convicts for the needs that you have, and you're left with people who aren't as fit for purpose, I guess, in whatever way, like physically, mentally, I don't know, ideologically, whatever the situation. And so you've got to change the way you do things. Well, now they're saying, I mean, goodness, why would you sign up to go into the front line if you're signed up without a 6-month contract and it's just to the end of the war, and you are not promised a pardon? So you're like, so I'm going to fight in the war just to get out of being in prison, but then when it finishes, I go back to being in prison. So basically, I've just got a high probability of dying, but at least I won't be in prison. Well, when you hear that they're actually making prisons colder, they're turning the heating off to try and make it miserable in prison, then you can see that basically this is just a forced mobilization of people from prison without giving them any hope of pardon or anything. Russian officials likely extended the contracts on the basis of Russian President or dictator Putin's partial mobilization order, as the Russian military does for mobilized personnel. The BBC reported that Russian military registration and enlistment officers formally release convict recruits in a procedure that is no longer legally equivalent to a parole or conditional release, suggesting that convict recruits are legally still considered prisoners. Russia has heavily relied on convict recruits to maintain a level of force generation that is roughly equivalent to Russian losses in Ukraine, and which is likely helping enable Russian forces to conduct regular operational level rotations. This is exactly what I've been saying, which is it looks like they're recruiting at the level they're losing. So 1,000 a day. They're claiming they're recruiting sort of 30,000. If they're losing 1,000 a day, then basically they're just feeding in recruits at a to a level that doesn't allow them to increase the size of their army and thus offer large-scale rotations. I think we're seeing rotations take place at the moment because of the change in what's going on the front line. So I think there are areas maybe where the Russians aren't massively attacking and the Ukrainians aren't massively attacking. And as it's quietened down in certain areas, the Russians have been able to rotate. Plus, we feel that there's this understanding there's quite a few troops up in the Luhansk area, so that's where some of these rotations, I think, are taking place. But generally speaking, at least for the last few months, they've been only able to recruit at the rate that they are losing troops. Anyway, to continue, Russian officials reported that as of October 2023, the Russian prison population was 266,000 people, a notable reduction of 54,000 prisoners from January 2023. The loss of convict recruits to attrition or assaults in Ukraine and the relatively short terms of their service contracts may have prompted the Kremlin to enact more restrictive terms of service in order to retain more convict recruits at the front in Ukraine. The contract terms for service in new Storm V units are far less attractive and may dampen efforts to recruit convicts, although Russian officials have routinely used coercive measures to force convicts to sign contracts. So, like I was talking about, like making them really cold and just getting them to force sign these contracts. Russian officials may have also changed the status of convict recruits in order to relieve forced generation burdens on the Russian federal budget. Russian opposition outlet Vazhnie Istory reported on January the 25th that Storm Z personnel addressed a letter to Putin asking him to resolve a widespread lack of promised payments for injuries, and documents on the expungement of criminal records for Storm Z personnel. They reported that a response from a Russian military prosecutor's office to a Storm Z fighter stated that Putin's recent decree promising single payments in cases of injury or death do not apply to Storm Z fighters. Well, that's what you get, Do you trust the Russian authorities to remain true to their words? No. Should Ukraine do an arrangement with a ceasefire agreement or some kind of peace agreement with Russia? No, they don't remain true to their word in any way, shape or form across any context. Anton Gerashchenko here reports that, this is really important, sanctions on turbine lubricants and turbine lubricant additives can significantly slow down the Russian military production. On December the 22nd, the US Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, quietly released a determination that would have enormous impacts on Russian military production and therefore on the war in Ukraine. The determination authorizes the sanctioning of the foreign financial institution that has conducted or facilitated the supply, sale or transfer to Russia of a range of items critical to Russia's military-industrial base, including computer numerical control, CNC machines, nitrocellulose, high-precision ball and roller bearings, turbine lubricants and turbine lubricant additives, and internal navigation systems and fiber optic gyroscopes. It indicates a US government recognition of something very important. Russia has some major industrial weaknesses. A major case of point is OFAC's new focus on turbine lubricants and turbine lubricant additives. The focus on lubricant additives reveals Russia's industrial weaknesses, as many crucial components are imported with a recent dependence on Asian suppliers. OFAC's move suggests potential future sanctions targeting various aspects of Russian military production, exploiting vulnerabilities in the chemicals sector, such as lithium and other specialized chemicals, imposing swift and decisive sanctions on industrial tools and chemical precursors could significantly impact Russian military-related production. So, we've also seen the US focus a lot on, and the EU, I believe, on the financial institutions. So it's not about punishing the exporters, because that's quite difficult. They sell to one, sell to another, and then someone in Kyrgyzstan, and then so on and so forth. It's like no one's really breaking the rules apart from maybe the people in Kyrgyzstan, which are probably not under sanction. But all these other entities are just, selling stuff to someone else. And so therefore, what they've had this move towards is punishing the financial institutions for if they've got good reason to believe that the money they are providing for these exports and whatever is going to be used to appropriate dual-use components for Russia eventually, then the bank gets hit by sanctions. And so the banks are therefore or financial institutions are going to be much tighter on releasing money to people who are going to be involved in that export line. Okay, Euromaidan Press here reporting something that I think is a bit of an issue that I've seen over the last 24 hours. This is coming out a lot, and I think it's a bit of not misinformation, but it's a bit disingenuous. Under current trends, the economic mobilization can give Russia equipment and ammo superiority not only over Ukraine, but also the EU in 3 to 4 years. Russia spends 29% of its budget on defense, not counting many private facilities mobilized for the war effort. And so you've ended up seeing stuff like this. So Euromaidan Press says the Russian military spending is 7 times higher than NATO average. According to only official information, Russia spends 29% of all public expenditure on defense, while the NATO average is 4.3%, including the vast 11% contribution from the USA. Okay. Problem is, this is percentages, right? And it doesn't tell you anything in kind of real terms. So Russia is spending basically spending a third of its budget on doing war. But that's not necessarily on tooling up equipment. That's also going to be recruitment, everything to do with the war effort. But it's also a percentage of a relatively small budget compared to other nations internationally. So the US may only be spending 11% on defense compared to 29%, but that's 11% on a vastly bigger budget. I mean, the budget of the US is phenomenal. And so just on its own, that kind of renders Russia's 29% kind of irrelevant. But if you're going to add the UK 5.29%, France 3.43%, Germany 2.75%, NATO whatever it is, 4.3%, is it, or something, then actually, and the idea that this is an alliance where everyone's working together, all those smaller percentages of a bigger pie added together create a much greater defense capability, production capability than the Russians, and they are all ramping up. I mean, Russia is probably at its max at the moment. I mean, it's on a war footing now. There's going to be a lot of discontent among the Russian population that are spending that much on the military and not enough on heating and energy infrastructure, so on and so forth. So I think this is somewhat disingenuous. If you just deal in percentages and don't know the size of each pie, then 29% of a canapé is sounds great, 29%, but it's 20, that's just a little bite. That's a third of a canapé I'm eating. Whereas 11% of a banquet, well, I'd take 11% of a banquet, thanks, rather than 29% of a canapé. So, terrible analogies aside, you get the point, right? Now, talking about, and I don't want to keep concentrating on this, but I have to, because do you know what? Everyone's talking about it, and this is what people are saying. Don't shoot the messenger. Right, Julia Davis from Russian Media Monitor says quotes a Russian propagandist. So this is a Russian propagandist. This is so frustrating. Saying, this will be a great revelation to other countries. It is even more dangerous to be a friend of the United States than its enemy. In the end, they will abandon you, leaving nothing but the scorched earth on your territory. Wow, that's such strong rhetoric, but arguably correct in at least somewhat. This is how Russia are reacting, by taking the piss, by saying, look at what America's doing as an ally. They can't get an aid package out. There's an impasse in Congress, and a number of their lawmakers are broadly supporting Putin, like for all intents and purposes. Bahaha. It's kind of laughing at the States and laughing at NATO and laughing at allied nations who are relying on the US as the main partner in their ideological positioning and military strategic outlook. Well, if the US are doing this to Ukraine, you can't rely on them. And that's what the Russians are saying here. Their propagandists are saying. And that is a real challenge. There's a real challenge. I think the US are losing that PR battle at the moment, and that's due to political opportunism and infighting. Right, European intel, moving on to geopolitical stuff. European intel is saying that the Kremlin aims to weaken the dollar and undermine the global financial system. All the while, this is what Russia is wanting to do. Now, this is all in line with BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and trying to provide an alternative an alternative currency for international trade and an alternative network and framework for international trade. But anyway, according to the Washington Post, citing European intelligence data, the Kremlin has held several meetings in the past 2 years to discuss ways to undermine the dollar as the world's reserve currency. This is completely unsurprising. The ultimate goal, according to one internal Russian Security Council document intercepted by one European intelligence agency, is to destroy the post-World War II global financial system and the power it gives Washington. I mean, this is the raison d'etre for BRICS, so of course this is what they're wanting to do. Quote, one of the most important tasks is to create a new world order, a Kremlin Security Council document dated 3rd of April 2023 states. Quote, Western countries led by the US are trying to impose their own structure based on their dominance. I mean, that's the nature of a global hegemony, right? Supreme power. You know, you want to maintain that and keep your dominance there. But of course, this then goes to speaking to say some of these Republican lawmakers say, do you want to maintain your dominance at the top of the global food chain? Because by walking away from Ukraine, you are giving Russia power. You are giving them, you are doing Putin's bidding. Another document advocates greater cooperation between China and Russia in artificial intelligence, cyber systems, and the Internet of Things. Written by Security Council Secretary Patrushev, often thought as being an alternative to Putin, it proposes Beijing and Moscow creating a new financial system and Eurasian digital currency based on alternative payment systems like blockchain to bypass Western dominance of global financial transactions. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denied to the Washington Post that Russia, quote, seeks to undermine US dominance of the global financial system, but conceded its goal is to create alternatives. So it's like, we deny that we're doing that, but we're doing that. Obviously, they're doing that. Right. Okay. Just to give you a bit of a broader analysis of what's going on in the world. So Donald Trump apparently is preparing for a massive new trade war with China. Now, this happened before. And this is not a criticism of what Donald Trump is doing here, but we need to understand what goes on when you're doing this. So if you take an America first or your own nation first approach to internationalism, to the world, then what you do is you shrink away from the world and you shrink away from free trade arrangements of the world. And in this case, you take on protectionism. So protectionism is a form of protecting your own economies, protecting your own sectors. So Trump did this previously, particularly with soybean farmers and farmers in general in the US, where he ramped up tariffs on imports of cheap Chinese goods, right? And that may sound brilliant. And for some people, they love that. But there are ramifications, right? And the ramifications are inflation. Price goes up. Instead of getting cheap stuff in from abroad, you put 60% tariffs on that, right? And then you're like, well, who pays for those tariffs? Well, who's buying the stuff? Well, the consumers. So what you're essentially doing is we're going to protect our own industries by putting a massive tariff on Chinese goods. And that means that we have to buy more expensive stuff that we produce internally, or buy stuff at a 60% increase rate from China. So who's paying for that? You guys are paying for that. So we're having this war with China, and who pays for that war? You pay for that war. And in fact, so I'm not saying it's good or bad. Yeah, I mean, there are arguments for and against that. You can try and, protect your own industry so they become more competitive, and eventually, down the line, American farmers are competing with Chinese farmers. But of course, in the labour market, that's going to be very difficult, because Chinese labour is much cheaper. And so one way of doing that is by making your own nation have cheap labour and poorer regulation, so on and so forth. So there are pros and cons, and it is all very, very difficult. Anyway, Washington Post says Trump is preparing a major new trade war with China. If Trump becomes US president again, he plans to impose a 60% duty on all imports from China. The measures will trigger a global trade war and lead to major disruptions in the world economy, the newspaper reports. The opinion of economists. And this will be true. I mean, that will be true. Now, if you remember what happened before, when Trump did do that, the ramifications were that he basically had to pay for that trade war by giving US farmers huge checks. Because, want to sideline this whole thing, but anyway, Trump's massive payouts to farmers will be hard to pull back. The president was already spending double his predecessor to spare farmers and the cost of his trade war. Now the price is reaching unsustainable levels. So they had to, anyway. Nowadays, farmers flourish under Biden, the recovery from Trump-era trade wars, etc., etc. Okay, that's NBC. Take it with a pinch of salt or whatever. But the trade wars might sound good in principle, but will have ramifications that mean you have to bail out, people or try and incur the cost of those trade wars yourself as a government rather than passing it on to the consumer. But in taking the costs on yourself as a government, that money comes from the taxpayer. So we don't want the consumers to pay more, so we'll subsidize stuff, but then who's paying for the subsidization? The taxpayer. So you are ending up paying for more anyway. So you get to these situations. Now, I always think it's not amusing, but interesting that many in America absolutely extol the virtues of the free market. It's like Paul Ryan standing up in Congress with Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, said, this is my Bible. We're all about small government, low tax, free market. It's all about free market capitalism, and that's what makes the world go round. Then those people then have to deal, who are really pro that, but then also pro Trump, have to deal with someone who's protectionist. Protectionism is the antithesis of the free market. It's saying we don't agree with the free market and we're going to put government tariffs and regulate or legislate or tax on goods coming from abroad or from particular markets or this and that. And so that is not free market economics. So on the one hand, you can't claim to be a free market capitalist, and on the other hand, fully support Trump and his economic endeavors, because Trump is a protectionist and he's not a free marketeer. There's just no way. Trump's approaches go much more to kind of a centralized strategic planning. It's the opposite of free market economics. And so, just worth being cognizant of that. And I'm not saying what Trump is doing there is bad or good. There will be good elements to putting tariffs on Chinese goods, and there will be bad elements to that. And you've got to decide where you sit there, and also sort out your own economic outlook. Don't just take on the economic outlook that is most convenient to you, depending on who's in charge. So when I don't know, a Democrat government produce some regulation, you go, I'm a free marketeer, I hate it when you do that. You're the opposite, you're just a commie. And then when Trump does that, you go, hey, I love protectionism, America first. Yeah, it's all about America first. It's like, well, that's double standards. So, just be aware if you do that. But anyway, that could throw a spanner into the works of what goes on geopolitically. And that I'm trying to link that back to this idea of Russia trying to provide or present an alternative with China, with BRICS, to international trade. Now, if the US recede into an isolationist America First policy, then is that playing into BRICS? And then if Trump comes along and introduces 60% tariffs on Chinese goods, how does that play into, would that damage China and BRICS, or will that eventually play into BRICS being able to present an alternative to the dollar? I don't know. Right, going to Europe and Hungary, Budapest will not officially condemn North Korea for the possible transfer of missiles to Russian troops. What are you doing, Hungary? Quote, we are not provided with any evidence and were unable to verify the validity of the allegations, said the head of Foreign Ministry Peter Szijjártó. I've seen evidence, I've seen satellite imagery that very clearly shows this. I don't know what you're looking at. If your intelligence if your nation's intelligence is less effective than me sitting at home on the internet, sort it out. I mean, you're only saying that because you don't want to do anything that disses Russia, because you are a puppet state of the newfound Soviet Union. And to add to that, there's nothing like a bit of brotherly EU love on a Sunday, and this is nothing like brotherly love. The head of Hungary's Mi Hazánk Mozgalom, Our Homeland Party, so a political party in Hungary, casually says that they'll steal the Transcarpathia region of Ukraine if they lose the war. This is the area that James from Why Ukraine and American in Ukraine, there's been on many of my live streams. He lives in that region, Transcarpathian region, where there are a lot of Hungarians living there, but Hungary is saying, we're going to take that back. If Ukraine lose the war, we're going to help ourselves to that region of Ukraine. Goodness me. Obviously, that's not the main party in Ukraine, Hungary, but goodness me. Right, Americans, I don't know how big Total Wine is as a store, but I love this. So please go and buy your stuff from Total Wine. And when you do, tell them that you're doing it because of this. And I hope this is widespread throughout all their stores. American store Total Wine stopped selling Russian vodka immediately after the invasion of Ukraine. Instead, they sell wine to stand with Ukraine and Ukrainian products. So we are no longer selling any Russian-made product, says this Total Wine label. We are no longer selling any Russian-made products. And Total Wine and More on Twitter say today, this is what you will see in our stores. In support of the Ukrainian people, we have removed all Russian-made products from our shelves. This is absolutely fabulous. I just wanted to give some well-deserved recognition to Total Wine, says this person on Twitter. They have amazing selections and stand with Ukraine, hashtag stand with Ukraine, and they don't sell any Russian products. And I was able to purchase Ukrainian vodka. Help support Ukraine in any way you can. Please go to Total Wine. Give them the love. If they are still doing this, if this is happening right now, go out to Total Wine, get yourself some alcohol, and have a fun night on the back of some Ukrainian vodka. But tell them about it and tell them on Twitter. This is fantastic. If they still do it, let me know if this is something they still do, Americans. I'm not advocating drinking as a tippling philosopher, ATP, but it would be cool if you can show them your support. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please take care. Like, subscribe, share, all that kind of stuff. Toodle pit. Speak soon.